If you've watched the overview for Tag It for the desktop, you probably wondered where those pre-configured fields came from. This was the panel that was used in the overview, and we're showing now the admin module helped to create or modify the options.xml files that build these panels. So we've opened this panel up in the admin module. Notice the first thing we have to specify is our schema name, as well as the XMP tag that's going to be used for every field. And for the tag it for the desktop, we need to know where the output for the droplet is going to be. So we put in the target, in this case demo targets is what we used. And you can browse and pick any share that's going to be used by the business system picking up these images. Another feature is being able to copy the image, which is why we've got it set so when I drag and drop from this folder onto the target, or to tag it, the file when we move to the target. You also do a move to where you don't leave the original behind. And this other option is just whether or not the droplet is always on top of your desktop. In this case we put it no, so I can hide it underneath other fields. So we look at the first field, it's the season field here, and it's a combo box, as you can tell. And the values for that combo box are coming from this seasons.xml file. And we've got the XMP label that will be used with the XMP tag internally to represent that field. And this is the display label that will be shown on the palette here. Those don't have to be the same values. It's best not to use special characters and things like that sometimes in the internal fields. So that's the first field, was the season field. The second field is company. Obviously you see that it changes the reference file that holds the values. I've actually opened up that reference file here, and you can see that I've added E-Spec, Freckled Chicken, Acme. I can add another value, and we'll just call it a demo company. And you notice there's also a value to select which one's going to be the default value that pulls up. So if we go back to the options tab, we now see that the company field is also required, so that you cannot complete and hit the submit button without having a value in the required field. And we have this value for it called output filing, which was the feature that determined whether or not it was going to be included here if the company actually made a folder in the output of the location. So that's the output filing there. So if we look at the division field, we'll notice a little more complexity because the division field also has a reference file. But notice it's saying that it's dependent on field number 2, which is the company. Which is to say, as I pick values for the company, then when I go to my dependent reference field, for each value that was from the previous field, the values that are going to get displayed are going to be different. And you can notice for each value there's an opportunity to pick a default for each one. So E-Spec would have a different default, Freckled Chicken would have its own default. And this allows us to build records that make sense with the data. It doesn't make sense necessarily if the company doesn't make little girls' clothes. You would want girls as an option here. So you can split it out this way and limit what's displayed for the values coming from the first field. So that's creating a dependent field. You can see that we've got that again, is that this one is the product type is now dependent on field number 3. So you can get kind of a daisy chain effect, which means you can build a hierarchy that matches, say, a business system's database structure and always create valid records coming out of Tag It. We can see next we have just a typical text input field, and it is required, and it's also going to be part of the output filing, whereas the last one is not required. It's not part of the output filing, so it's just a simple text entry field. So with that being said, we could say we're going to add a new field, and it defaults to being a text input field. But if we look, we've got a text area field, which is a multi-line text box. We can create a date field, which allows you to use a date picker to select either today's date or a date in the future. It could be a simple checkbox, which is be a yes/no check, or the combo box that we've been working with. So you've got several types of different field types that you can add when you add a new field. Yeah, I've now opened up a more complicated options.xml file, and you can see a few other things that we can do in these files. One, we now have a date field, and it's shown as required. But what we wanted to show in this one is the fact that you can do things like add a quote copyright field, and we're going to put a value in here, but we're going to make it hidden, which means it's not going to show up in the panel at all. It's just always going to put this default value in the value that's hidden, and that'll just be for every file that Taggart processes. So if you just want to put some information that's pertinent to the author or the individual workstation that created it, you can just put a workstation ID in here, a lot of options like that, but it's something the user doesn't have to fill out. The other thing that is in this panel is the fact that we can now use an individual schema instead of the custom schema that we created. Notice we're using the Adobe Photoshop schema, and we're using their field called job ID, and it's what we're going to label it, but it's the transmission reference field in the Photoshop XMP panel. And we can make it required, which is something that typically isn't done in these custom or these standard fields. So here's another Photoshop field called instructions, another for credit line, or maybe one for source. Notice I didn't make these required. Here's one that goes to the Perl format and lets you make it a hidden field, so there's always something there. Again, we can do a copyright field in the Perl and put a default value in there, or maybe some usage instructions in the Adobe panel at this point. So the concept is that we can use standard XMP panels as well as the custom XMP that we're going to match to our business system. Now, we've been using this admin module to create these files, but in reality, all of this is an XML file. So if you're more comfortable editing XML in your own XML editor, you could have at it and create these files, without our tool here. The concept is this tool is made for somebody that doesn't necessarily know XML. We can create the panels this way. So those are the examples of the kind of things we can do to create a panel, and then you put that into Taggart. Notice that this is for Taggart Desktop, but it also will work for Taggart for Illustrator. So you don't have to create two different panels. The same options file is going to work for both.